When we first moved to Denmark in 2017, we heard a lot of things about what to expect. Some of them turned out to be true and others turned out to be myths. So we decided to put together this video of 7 different myths about living in Denmark that we heard before we moved here and what the reality is.
The first myth is that everyone speaks English. And I want to clarify this. English proficiency is in the high 90% in Denmark, and almost everybody and everyone you interact with, you can get by with English quite well. But at the same time, it's a foreign country. The language here is Danish. So just because everyone speaks English doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get by only in English your entire life while you're living here. Some scenarios are going to be much better for you if you speak Danish and understand Danish. We have to be mindful that English is a second or third language for most people that are here in Denmark, whether they're Danish or from someplace else and living here. So because we're native speakers, we have to be mindful of that. Be careful of the speed with which we speak. Sorry if we're talking too fast right now. And some of the colloquialisms or references that we use, which may not be captured by everybody. That's just part of the fun of having the native tongue that we have as kind of the lingua franca for everybody.
Also keep in mind that there are going to be certain situations where somebody's not going to necessarily know all of the words in English, or they may not have a direct translation. So if you're, say, signing a lease to get an apartment, or if you're even ordering some food or doing something medical, you're going to have certain situations where there may not be a direct English translation, or somebody that speaks very good English won't have all of the vocabulary necessary to get through a certain transaction with you. So you're going to have to meet people halfway. Another myth that we hear a lot is about the Danish work-life balance being perfect. And look, nothing is perfect and nowhere is perfect. Yes, you will probably work a 37.5-hour work week with 5 weeks of holiday per year, and a lot of these things that are sort of agreed upon between the state and the labor unions here, but not everyone has all of these working conditions and hours. And another key thing to keep in mind is that people work very hard during those hours. Time away from work is definitely respected more in Denmark, which I think is a big thing. And that's the one I think is more universally a trait here. That the Danish work-life balance really comes from the fact that your time away from work is respected, and that could mean that if you or one of your coworkers has to leave the office early to do a childcare school pickup, and then they're going to make up a few hours after work, that's usually respected, and in general, that's where the work-life balance is going to come into play. You're not going to necessarily be answering emails and expected to do things once your workday is over.
Yeah, at the same time, this is a place where business is done. So if you're working in an office, you're working in a period that's quite busy, you're going to work quite hard, as Derek said. And there's also a chance you may work for some of the smaller companies that are here, startups and things like that. Those can obviously be quite intense, as well as you have very small teams that are going and trying to build a business. So work-life balance doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have your feet up on the desk while you're working and taking a nice salary.
Yeah, so definitely do your homework and find out what the actual work culture is like wherever you're looking for a job or starting a job.
Another myth that often comes up is that Denmark is a purely homogeneous society, nothing but Danes and Vikings living here. In fact, about 10% of the people that are living here are not ethnically Danish, meaning they either weren't born in Denmark or one of their first or second generations ahead of them were not born in Denmark. So that means that there are some challenges, as there certainly has been a change over the last 50 or 100 years from where Denmark was probably a lot more homogeneous in the past, and now you have a much more multicultural society, especially in the larger cities. So there are challenges faced by minorities, especially around inclusion, and some pushback from certain political parties and people within the country. And it's interesting because since we live in Copenhagen, we see a little bit of a different experience here. Obviously, Copenhagen can be a quite diverse and multicultural city. Other parts of Denmark are maybe more homogeneous. So there's very big differences as you go across the country on that level of homogeneity that maybe you hear about in Denmark.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that diversity can come in different forms, and that may mean that I have a lot more international friends than I may have when I lived in the US, where my friends were from different cultural backgrounds, but all American. Now I have a lot of friends in Denmark and living in Copenhagen that come from different countries, even if they do look like me or come from a similar background. Another myth is that the Danish welfare state takes care of everything and you don't have any stress or worries in life. And that's Not exactly true. It is great and it is a very robust system, but nothing is free. It's got different pay-fors. So yes, you're paying for things through your taxes. And there are many people that have private insurances. It's not this, state-run everything and everything taken care of for you. It's more of a blended model. And yes, things are covered, but it also could mean that since everyone is covered, if you don't have private insurances, you may be waiting a little bit longer to see a specialist, or you have to travel a little bit farther to see somebody to take care of the different needs that you have. And sometimes you may not get any non-necessary care straight away. You still pay for prescriptions and things like that. And I think that the lesson is it may be a very good system that does cover everybody, but it may not be what you are expecting or what is kind of perpetuated online or in different groups that talk about what life is like with the welfare state in Denmark.
Yeah, and I think another key point is that it is a system, which means that you're dealing with bureaucracies, you're dealing with people making certain choices. So it's important as you come here, especially if you're new and you didn't grow up in this system, to make sure that you ask questions and advocate for yourself, because there may be things that people assume that you don't know, and the extra questions that you have to ask. So make sure you still advocate. One of the big things that we've learned here is even though the welfare state is expansive and the system in general works, you need to self-advocate. Don't be afraid to ask questions to your friends or colleagues if you're not clear on how things are going, because you still have to manage the system to make it work for you.
Yeah, I actually even found this out in a different way where I had nasal polyp surgery. And I didn't even realize that I could go to an ENT, an ear, nose, throat specialist without a referral. It's the one specialist that you can see without a referral from your primary physician in Denmark. I didn't realize that at the time. And it took longer than 6 months for them to schedule the surgery. So in that case, I was actually able to demand to see a private hospital to have that surgery. So it's important that you know these things. And in, again, these cases, I had to self-advocate. When I talked to friends about it, they made sure that I knew, no, you can go there without a referral. No, you can go to a private hospital now if they're not scheduling you quick enough. These are things that you have to take upon yourself to handle.
Another myth is that nobody has cars. People only travel by bike in Denmark. Now, part of this was perpetuated by the former ambassador from the U.S. to Denmark, Carla Sands, who tweeted that in Denmark, middle-class people can't afford to drive a car. They have a bike and take the train for long trips. Now, you certainly can get around by cycling or walking or public transit across almost all of Denmark, and it's a fantastic place for doing these things. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that nobody has a car, and there certainly are a lot of places in Denmark that are really only accessible by car. And especially outside of the major cities, people need to have cars to get around, just like basically anywhere else in the world. So it's not like cars don't exist here. At the same time, cars are not cheap to have here. I mean, there's certainly high taxes on automobiles, gas is taxed as well. So people that do have a car, it is quite an expense to be able to have. And so you find things like families having one car for the family, whereas in, say, the US, it's common for a family to have 2 cars or even more.
Yeah, for example, we don't have a car, and it's more the fact that we can generally get around living in the city using public transportation or by cycling. But if we lived a bit farther out, we probably would. And I think a big thing with this tweet that the former ambassador put out, she may have gotten it right. Most people may choose to bike or take a train for longer trips, but that doesn't mean that it's because they can't afford a car or that you don't still need a car in other places. It's just kind of a silly myth. Another common myth is that there's this perception of Denmark being sort of a near-perfect utopia. And don't get me wrong, I think that it is a very wonderful place to live. You can have an excellent life here in Denmark, but the way that sort of Danish society and the welfare state can be glorified, especially by politicians in the US, for example, like Bernie Sanders, that often brings up Denmark, it doesn't mean that there aren't issues here. I think any Dane will tell you that there are all kinds of social issues in Denmark, and many people are worried about things like inequality, access to mental health care, even homelessness exists in Denmark. So moving here doesn't mean that your problems won't go away or that there are no problems here just because there is a strong welfare state. You'll definitely have less stress in your daily life. I absolutely think that that is true, but don't think that it will solve all of your problems to live in Denmark and that it's some utopian society as soon as you get here.
Yeah, that's probably been one of the more fascinating things for us as we've lived here longer and went from being here on, say, an expat, not really caring about local politics, to understanding these conversations that happen. I think it's fascinating is to learn that on the inside, certainly people hold Denmark in very high regard. They think it's a phenomenal place, as they should, but there certainly are a lot of debates going on how to make Denmark a better place for everybody. And it's fascinating to hear these things going on, just like any country. Another myth is that all Danes are happy. Now, this comes from the various surveys that come out where Denmark is always first, second, or third in the happiest countries in the world. And certainly this is a place where people are in a good mood, live a good life, as everything that we've said, but I would define this a little bit more as people being content than happy necessarily. I think there's also a big difference between, say, individual and collective happiness. With kind of a well-structured society, a well-structured government, a lot of trust in each other, certainly people have a content and a satisfied life, but at the same time, this certainly is not, as we said, a utopia where everything is taken care of. Mental health is one of the big issues here in Denmark, as certainly people deal with a lot of individual challenges that they have, maybe partly because there's this perception that everybody has to be happy, and the truth is that none of us feel happy 100% of the time every single day. So this is certainly something where people are content, people are satisfied, but maybe that term happy is almost overbearing on people that live here.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, okay? We don't have to be happy all the time. And I think that myth really gives you the idea that people are just walking around with that stupid grin on their face all the time. And that's just not the case. Again, you're gonna have the same problems here that you would anywhere else. People here also have problems, good days and bad days. Just because they're more content does not necessarily mean that everyone is happy all the time. Another myth that you may be wondering about, or you often see focused on with different memes and things on the internet, is that McDonald's workers in Denmark get paid $25 an hour and all of these things, right? It may surprise you to know that the minimum wage in Denmark is not at all what you think. It's a big myth. But if you want to learn more about that, you're gonna have to watch this video right here and learn about Denmark's minimum wage. It'll surprise you. Thanks for watching today, everybody.
Hi.